So let's investigate our origins, our ancestors. Where do we come from? And we're going to look at things called hominids, which we are. We're going to look at the tools that help us understand our past and our ancestry, like artifacts and fossils. And we're going to try to understand how we know. How do we know who we are? How do we know our ancestry, and how do we know how old possibly we are, or what we looked like millions of years ago? So these are all really great questions. So I want you to look at this picture on the bottom left-hand corner. And on the bottom left-hand corner, you have, it looks like paleontologists. And a paleontologist are scientists that study early or old life or ancient life. So it could be something like, I'm sure you've heard of paleontology when we talk about dinosaurs, but paleontologists also study early life in terms of our ancestry. And what you can see is they are excavating and they are cleaning off they found footprints in Tanzania, which is in Africa, of our early ancestors, and you could tell a lot by a footprint. You could maybe figure out the height of a person, about how much they weigh, and you could tell how they walk. You could tell where they walk to and from, and that gives us a lot of insight into how our early ancestors behaved. And what these footprints are probably our earliest of ancestors, which we call the species Australopithecine. Australopithecine is our earliest ancestors, and we could trace all the way back millions of years. We're going to talk about the main stages of hominin development, but there's many, and there's branching, and it gets much more immense and larger than what we're going to look at. But we're going to look at the main stages in these videos. Now, there's kind of a sketch of what we think our early ancestors would have looked like when we start walking upright. And you can see, we could tell they walk upright because look at the footprints. There's no, if they walked on all fours, they would have handprints or some kind of prints in the front that they were walking on 4 feet. And you could tell this species, hominids are our ancestors that walk upright, stood up, relatively straight, not perfectly straight, but would have stood up on 2 legs. And that's really where a lot of paleontologists would maybe argue that that's kind of the beginning of humans, when we start standing up. And we'll get into that. So how do we know? And where are we from? So on the far left-hand corner, our left side, I want you to look at this map. And I want to tell you, Mr. Metropolis, what are your sources? And that's what you should be asking me. Like, where do I get my information from? And I'm going to tell you, my sources on this is the Smithsonian, which is basically the American Museum Institution, with some of the best social scientists in America, and National Geographic, which is a well-published magazine that talks about science and animals and humans and about understanding our Earth. So on the left-hand side, you can see that most scientists are going to argue that human beings began, well, we don't argue about beginning in Africa. Almost all scientists are in agreement that we're from Africa, that all humans are from Africa. And we have other ways of telling that we're from Africa, just in terms of finding the earliest fossils that we'll talk about and the earliest footprints. And one great thing you could find, and I want you to think about this, that's kind of gross, is poop. Poop is a real treasure to paleontologists and scientists, because poop will tell you what we ate and how far we traveled. Because if berries grow 500 miles away from where the poop's found, that tells us that we would move long distances to eat berries. So I want you to look at these darker brown areas on the map. Those are the places where we found a lot. I mean, a lot. We're talking about hundreds of fossils that show, and we'll get into what a fossil is, that show our early ancestry. Now, so you have South Africa at the bottom. We've found some really early ancestors, and really interesting, we even found some of our ancestors did some kind of burial rituals, possibly, where we found a cave, and at the back of the cave, they would throw the bones of the dead. So that's very human, that there would be some kind of ritual, maybe, or some kind of behavior where we would want to bury our dead. Okay, so think about it. Like dogs don't, and other animals don't. They don't bury their dead. Humans do. We burn or bury, or we do something with the dead bodies for many reasons. And at some point, we probably figured out that it makes sense to burn the body or bury it, so because of disease. But also, you think about if you don't bury a body, animals will eat it, and that people feel that's disrespectful. And then people have religious beliefs too, like they believe things like that if they're Christian, like if they die and they're not buried, some people believe that like when if they believe that Jesus is going to come back to Earth, their bodies will rise and they need them again. It depends on the religion. Now, but you can see this dark area along what's called the Great Rift Valley is very, very much argued to be the beginning of humanity. Now, there is a lot of old fossils, and we call it the cradle of humanity in South Africa. So around these areas is where we started. And the main belief is with the science is that early on, during the uh, millions of years, or actually about 200, I'm sorry, about 200,000 years ago, there was probably a huge drought and possibly huge environmental disasters. And what happened is our ancestors were essentially going extinct. So Homo sapiens, which about 200,000 years ago, that's the species we actually are, Homo sapiens. They were close to done. If you think about how little a couple thousand people would be, it'd be like maybe the population of a big high school in St. Louis. And what happened is they had to make a decision. They're either going to stay in Africa and maybe starve to death, or they're going to move as hunter and gatherers to a better location to survive. So many left, and we'll get more into this. You see in Egypt, there's an isthmus, that little strip, and that connects to Asia, and many left and went to the Middle East, and we'll later talk about what happened there. But by doing that, they saved us. It's kind of crazy to think that human beings were maybe 200,000 years ago, we were probably just within inches of being extinct and not even being here today. And now we're building computers where I could talk to you about our early ancestors. So walk me through that door. So let's look about, well, Metropolis, how does paleontologists know this stuff? Well, that's a very fair question. So yes, we excavate, which means we dig up or we find things and items, and though that's artifacts, and though that is an archaeologist we'll talk about. But fossils are looked at and examined by paleontologists, which study the remains of ancient living things. Um, so some fossils would be, for example, plants are fossils. That would tell us a lot about the environment at the time. And also, when the earth gets older and older, there's layers of soil. So we could tell about how deep things are in the ground, and we could look from that and think about how long ago that this stuff happened. Because if it's buried 20 feet in the ground, and we know that 20 feet in the ground is about 1 million years ago, that tells us about how long ago that happened. Also, we have what's called carbon dating, where we can actually measure how old and figure out, scientists can figure out how old something is that is living was, because everything that's living contains carbon. Now, animals could be fossils. I want you guys to think about what are some other things that could be fossilized. People are fossils, and when I say we know, we're almost extremely certain that we started in Africa. We found lots, I mean hundreds of fossils all across Africa that are millions of years old, that from our early ancestors. So we know that we began in Africa. And also now we could do with DNA. So we could swab your mouth and we could test your DNA, and we can find out that, and we found out that we're all related. So there's only one race of humans, Homo sapiens. We're all related, and that maybe some people's ancestors left Africa later, or some never left Africa, but we're all related to everybody. So somebody in Africa is absolutely related to somebody in Australia. And you might be closer or more related to somebody based on how long you've lived in an area, but we're only one race, one species of called Homo sapien. And our DNA is almost exact. Insects can get fossilized. They get caught in amber, which is like sap from a tree, and we could tell. Dinosaurs, how do we know dinosaurs exist? We have their fossils. So walk me through that door. Now, on the other side of it, how do we know human beings behaved? Well, we have artifacts, human-made objects from the past. Okay, so here's some objects. What are some things that could be artifacts? I want you guys to yell it out. So you've got arrowheads, which are on arrows or bows and arrows. We could hunt. Our ancestors had spears with arrowheads. Knives. You can see there's some early knives. A knife might not have a, it might just be a really sharp piece of bone that you could cut through something or stab or cut meat or open a shell. Like we used to eat a lot of shellfish, like crab or clams, and open it up to eat the meat. Well, it's a lot of times how we probably use tools at first. You've got pots. You can see that pot are artifacts. That tells us a lot about the ancestors. You can see that chair is an example from the ancient Egyptians. And that is a lot of how we know that. Now, also, we have archaeologists. So archaeologists are the men or women that search for artifacts. Now, you can see this guy's digging up a dead body, so he is probably a paleontologist. The guy on the left is pulling things that are made up by human beings, which are archaeologists. So remember, an archaeologist is somebody that studies artifacts, monuments, and relics to understand the past. They don't necessarily do fossils. They will use the fossils and they will work with the paleontologists. But yes, they will look at the fossils as well to try to understand things and communicate. But it's usually a team between archaeologists and paleontologists. So I want you to think about how scientists look at these things today.